Welcome to the Archive of Nations, whom are the custodians of the sacred records from time immemorial. Please subscribe and press the notification button as we have many lessons to educate and empower with a correct narrative of the past to create a lawful blueprint for the future. Welcome to webisode 20 entitled 19 Statements on Black Egypt by Cheikh Anta Diop. In this webisode, we focus on 19 powerful statements from a teacher to his students from his wide array of literature. The generation that followed did not have the same concerns. None of its members attempted to follow the example of the past generation. There was no longer anyone with the noble determination to get to know the great men of the world, or if there were some individuals consumed with this curiosity, they were few in number. From then on, there remained only vulgar minds given over to hatred, envy, and discord, who took an interest only in things which did not concern them: gossip, slander, calumny of one's neighbors, all those things which are the source of the worst of our troubles. Cheikh Anta Diop, Pre-Colonial Black Africa. When we say that the ancestors of the blacks, who today live mainly in Black Africa, were the first to invent mathematics, astronomy, the calendar, sciences in general, arts, religion, agriculture, social organization, medicine, writing, technique, architecture, that they were the first to erect buildings out of 6 million tons of stone, the Great Pyramid, as architects and engineers, not simply as unskilled laborers, that they built the immense Temple of Karnak, that forest of columns with its famed hypostyle hall large enough to hold Notre Dame and its towers, that they sculpted the first colossal statues, colossi of Memnon, etc. When we say all that, we are merely expressing the plain, unvarnished truth that no one today can refute by arguments worthy of the name. Cheikh Anta Diop, The African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality. The line of ill-intentional Egyptologists, equipped with a ferocious erudition, have committed their well-known crime against science by becoming guilty of a deliberate falsification of the history of humanity. Supported by the governing powers of all the Western countries, this ideology, based on a moral and intellectual swindle, easily won out over the true scientific current developed by a parallel group of Egyptologists of goodwill, whose intellectual uprightness and even courage cannot be stressed strongly enough. The new Egyptological ideology, born at the opportune moment, reinforced the theoretical basis of imperialist ideology. That is why it easily drowned out the voice of science by throwing the veil of falsification over historical truth. This ideology was spread with the help of considerable publicity and taught the world over because it alone had the material and financial means for its own propagation. Thus, imperialism, like the prehistoric hunter, first killed the being spiritually and culturally before trying to eliminate it physically. The negation of the history and intellectual accomplishments of Black Africans was cultural, mental murder, which preceded and paved the way for their genocide here and there in the world. Cheikh Anta Diop, Civilization or Barbarism, an Authentic Anthropology. Only a loyal, determined struggle to destroy cultural aggression and bring out the truth, whatever it may be, is revolutionary and consonant with real progress. It is the only approach which opens onto the universal. Humanitarian declarations are not called for and add nothing to real progress. Cheikh Anta Diop, The African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality. Anthropologists have invented the ingenious, convenient, fictional notion of the true Negro, which allows them to consider, if need be, all the real Negroes on Earth as fake Negroes, more or less approaching a kind of Platonic archetype, without ever attaining it. Thus, African history is full of Negroids, Hamites, Semi-Hamites, Nilo-Hamitics, Ethiopoids, Sabaeans, even Caucasoids. Yet, if one stuck strictly to scientific data and archaeological facts, the prototype of the white race would be sought in vain throughout the earliest years of present-day humanity. Cheikh Anta Diop, The African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality. In the Nile Valley, civilization resulted from man's adaptation to that particular milieu. As declared by the ancients and by the Egyptians themselves, it originated in Nubia. This is confirmed by our knowledge that the basic elements of Egyptian civilization are neither in Lower Egypt, nor in Asia, nor in Europe, but in Nubia and the heart of Africa. Moreover, that is where we find the animals and plants represented in hieroglyphic writing. Cheikh Anta Diop, the African origin of civilization, myth or reality. If modern civilization should disappear today, but leave libraries untouched, survivors could open almost any book and perceive immediately that persons living south of the Sahara are called blacks. The term Black Africa would suffice to indicate the habitat of the black race. Nothing similar is found in Egyptian texts. Whenever the Egyptians use the word black, Kim, it is to designate themselves or their country, Kemet, land of the blacks. Cheikh Anta Diop, the African origin of civilization, myth or reality. By the Middle Ages, the introduction of the trivium was well known. Sudi, an educated black from Timbuktu, author of the well-known work entitled Tariq-es Student, cites amongst the subjects that he mastered logic, dialectation, grammar, rhetoric, not to mention law and other disciplines, the long lists of subjects studied and the lettered African intellectuals who taught them at the University of Timbuktu. Cheikh Anta Diop, Civilization ou Barbarie. In the Lake Debo region, in Mali, on the Niger, pyramids are also found, and these were dubbed mounds, as might be expected. This is the usual procedure in the attempt to disparage African values. In contrast, there is the reverse procedure consisting of describing a clay tumulus, a real mound, in Mesopotamia, as the most perfect temple that the human mind can imagine. It goes without saying that such reconstructions are generally mere wishful thinking. Cheikh Anta Diop, the African origin of civilization, myth or reality. Humanity's moral conscience progresses, slowly yet surely. Cheikh Anta Diop, Civilization ou Barbarie. To overcome the tremendous obstacles in the way of the economic unification of Africa, decisive political actions are required in the first place. Political unification is a prerequisite. The rational organization of African economies cannot precede the political organization of Africa. The elaboration of a rational formula of economic organization must come after the creation of a federal political entity. It is only within the framework of such a geopolitical entity that a rational economic development and cooperation can be inserted. The inverse leads to the type of results we have witnessed over the years. Cheikh Anta Diop, Black Africa, the economic and cultural basis for a federated state. If the African anthropologist made a point of examining European races under the magnifying glass, he would be able to multiply them ad infinitum by grouping physiognomies into races and subraces as artificially as his European counterpart does with regard to Africa. He would, in turn, succeed in dissolving collective European reality into a fog of insignificant facts. Cheikh Anta Diop, the African origin of civilization, myth or reality. Thus it can be said that, until the 15th century, Black Africa never lost its civilization. Frobenius reports, not that the first European navigators at the end of the Middle Ages failed to make some very remarkable observations. When they reached the Bay of Guinea and alighted at Vaida, the captains were astonished to find well-planned streets bordered for several leagues by 2 rows of trees. For days they traversed a countryside covered by magnificent fields, inhabited by men in colorful attire that they had woven themselves. More to the south, in the Kingdom of the Congo, a teeming crowd clad in silk and velvet, large states, well ordered down to the smallest detail, powerful rulers, prosperous industries. Civilized to the marrow of their bones. Entirely similar was the condition of the lands on the east coast, Mozambique, for example. The revelations of the navigators from the 15th to the 18th centuries provide positive proof that Black Africa, which extended south of the desert zone of the Sahara, was still in full bloom in all the splendor of harmonious, well-organized civilizations. This flowering the European conquistadors destroyed as they advanced. Cheikh Anta Diop, the African origin of civilization, myth or reality. Until now, 1960, date of the first edition, the history of Black Africa has always been written with dates as dry as laundry lists, and no one has almost ever tried to find the key that unlocks the door to the intelligence, the understanding of African society. Cheikh Anta Diop. Thanks to superior organization, the Egyptian armed forces scored a dual victory, on land and sea, over that second alliance. The fleet of the peoples of the north was entirely destroyed and the invasion route through the delta was cut. At the same time, a third coalition of the same white-skinned Indo-Aryans was being assembled, again in Libya, against the black Egyptian nation. Yet, this was not a racial conflict in the modern sense. To be sure, the two hostile groups were fully conscious of their ethnic and racial differences, but it was much more a question of the great movement of disinherited peoples of the north toward richer and more advanced countries. Ramses III demolished that third coalition as he had destroyed the first two. As a result of this third victory over the Indo-Aryans, he took an exceptional number of prisoners. This enabled him to increase appreciably the slave labor force on royal construction sites and in the army. Such was invariably the procedure for acclimating white-skinned persons in Egypt, a process that became especially widespread during the Low period. By bearing this in mind, we may avoid attributing a purely imaginary role to people who contributed absolutely nothing to Egyptian civilization. Cheikh Anta Diop, the African origin of civilization, myth or reality. Yet the documents at our disposal allow us to do that practically without any break in continuity for a period of 2,000 years, at least insofar as West Africa is concerned. Therefore, it had become indispensable to unfreeze, in a manner of speaking to defossilize that African history which was there at hand, lifeless, imprisoned in the documents. Cheikh Anta Diop, Pre-Colonial Black Africa. Egypt's prestige abroad was so intact that the king of Tyre declared, all industries came from Egypt and all sciences first shone forth there, cf. Perin, 2, 505. Cheikh Anta Diop, the African origin of civilization, myth or reality. More importantly, he has applied this encyclopedic knowledge to his researches on African history. While pursuing this research, he told the First International Congress of Black Writers and Artists in September 1956, "We have come to discover that the ancient pharaonic Egyptian civilization was undoubtedly a Negro civilization." To defend this thesis, anthropological, ethnological, linguistic, historical, and cultural arguments have been provided. To judge their validity, it suffices to refer to Nations Niger's et culture, Cheikh Anta Diop, the African origin of civilization, myth or reality. A single fact then remains vouched for by the documents in the Libyan thesis, Aryan, cited by Fontaines, that is the utilization of whites, blue-eyed, tattooed blondes, as mercenaries by the Negro pharaohs. Those tribes, called Libyans, were savage hordes in the western part of the Delta, where their presence, historically, is not recognized until the 18th dynasty. The Egyptians, who always considered them as veritable savages, took care not to be confused with them. At most, they condescended to use them as mercenaries. They never stopped holding them in check outside their borders by constant expeditions. Not until the Low Epoch was Egypt gradually permeated by domesticated Libyans who settled in the Delta. Cheikh Anta Diop, the African origin of civilization,